Hello, and welcome to this Almanac North special. I'm Pamela Gnunjiri, and I was invited by WDSE, WRPT, to moderate tonight's discussion. We continue tonight a new program on issues facing our community. We're calling it the Almanac North Focus On Specials, in-depth discussions to help create a community dialogue. You will see different hosts as this series continues and conversations designed to educate and challenge all of us to be better. Tonight's focus is on systemic racism. Joining me in the studio tonight is Charles Fye, a clinical therapist and owner of Fye Consulting, and Chief Mike Tusken of the Duluth Police Department. Thank you for being here tonight, gentlemen. Let's begin this discussion with your understanding of the term systemic racism. We'll start with you, Chief Tusken.
Yes, my understanding of that term is certainly is a system that we have in place that does not promote equity. And I often look at in our society, we often have access that is different to everything from employment, to healthcare, to housing, to education, and those are all barriers that are put in place oftentimes by the people who are in power in the United States. White people have built systems that certainly don't or have barriers in place for oftentimes people of color.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Mr. Fye.
Adding to what Chief Tusken says, it is, when you look at it, is the normalization and legitimization of factors that cumulatively put a certain group, in this case people of color, at a disadvantage. And this, there are keywords here: normalization. Mm-hmm. So it is normalized in our society. It happens in our day-to-day activities. Completely, sometimes we view it as normal. Mm-hmm. And then legitimization, we legitimize it through different, the laws we pass, our institutions, and we support it with our tax-paying money. I think Chief Tusken listed healthcare systems, housing, education. We've seen it manifest even with the coronavirus, with a lot of, with it negatively affecting Black people, African Americans, and Native people. Is really wreaking havoc in these communities. What tells us that the healthcare system doesn't prove, is not equitable. It places people of color at a disadvantage, and so they don't have the equal access to healthcare as our white, the white people. So ultimately, when a disaster like this happens, or when it negatively affects, compounded to all the systems that we have, it puts people of color at a great disadvantage. We've seen it happen in housing, where neighborhoods where we have many research is showing and statistics is showing 10 to 20% people of color in it, the housing values drop, which in effect affects the ability to build wealth, which compounded even with our school system, then affects our funding for schools, because ultimately it is tied, or school funding in a lot of our communities becomes tied to property value. So if my house is not accruing equity in the same way in which communities that are majority white is accruing equity, eventually, my property goes down, property values go down, it affects our ability to build wealth, to weather an economic crisis like what's happening today because of the coronavirus, to weather health crisis. And so the system continues to keep people of color at a disadvantage. What else? Systems that have been put, and this is historical, both historical and present. Sometimes we think that this is based more on historical factors, but it is happening today. It is happening in our communities today. And we are, as citizens, even those people that believe in themselves that they've transcended the that the racism, so long as we are continuously participating in the system, we are promoting that racism. I think there's more to talk about.
Yes, it's a very broad subject and a very important subject, a subject that we'll be discussing our entire lives. So Merriam-Webster currently defines racism, and I'm going to use the definition for racism, as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So as I read this definition, it seemed to me that this definition implies a finite state of being that defies many other notions and observations that creation, animals, people, and society evolve and they adapt to changes in their environment for the purpose of survival. Why do you think that was not applicable to race, the ability to adapt? Because this definition takes that ability away. What do you, when you hear that, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Well, you spoke to the fact that human race is a human construct that was created and manufactured, and it is a means to do one-upmanship, if you will. And I appreciated Charles said is that if we participate in a system, we are part of that system. And yet it is sometimes difficult for people who look like me to always understand what it is like to walk a mile in the shoes of someone who has had to work that much harder, has struggled, who has toiled and fought and cried and to get to the same place that I may have just walked into. It was easy. And so I think sometimes it's very difficult for oftentimes for people to stop and say, my reality is not everyone's reality. My America doesn't look like other people's America. And it only happens if you make yourself vulnerable enough to hear and to listen and to have conversations and have better understanding. While I'll never quite know what it is like to walk in the shoes of either of you, I can learn, and I learn every day, and it changes my perspective as a leader about how I approach my work.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily will never know what it's like, but I can learn, and we continue. I think it's important for us to continue to learn.
Okay. Charles, I know what I said was a really long statement. If you want me to repeat it, I'd be glad to do that for you, but.
Well, I can just pick up from.
Okay.
So race being a kind of a human construct, it is also important to note that we, as human beings, tend to favor our own in-group.
Okay.
And this is where if when you look at the founding fathers of this country, when they sat down to write the Constitution, there wasn't people of color around the table. So there was no input. But now, so this is a system that has been built out of that. The ideas are great, but the implementation becomes biased because we tend to make laws that favor our own in-group. And so when you have a group of white male sitting around the table making policies, definitely those policies are going to be policies that would favor white people. And that has continued on. And that's how institutional racism, systemic racism gets built. And we continue to foster that to, as it just continues to get fostered and get built on and built on and built on by different institutions and even in our own personal interactions with each other. Because we gradually start to get these messages from, the media that depict a certain group of people as dangerous, uncivilized, uneducated, which is, when we go back to slavery, a black person was considered one of the hardest working people on the planet because they were strong, they were resilient, and they were working. The moment slavery ended, they became one of the most dangerous people you will ever encounter. And then they became, and that's the narrative, they, being looked upon as dangerous and being looked upon as lazy, wanting handouts, and not worthy of employment. That was clearly constructed because now I have to pay someone to do the job. So in order not to either underpay you, I will have to undercut you, call you lazy, unproductive, because that means I get to pay you less. And that has continued it's continued to be written and to be propagated with newer laws And of course the media has taken that and has continuously reinforced that idea. So what with that becomes, black communities or I try to not use the word communities, but neighborhoods become overpoliced because we see people of color as dangerous, crime-ridden neighborhoods, so we overpolice them, which then leads to over-incarceration, which, then further puts, black people at a disadvantage, economic-wise, education-wise, and health-wise. In all just different facets of our society.
Okay. So there are a young lady from Missouri challenged Merriam-Webster's definition of racism, and they heard her. She wrote to the editors of Merriam-Webster stating that racism was prejudice combined with social and institutional power. It is a system of advantage based on skin color. So Merriam-Webster is in the process of changing their definition, or at least adding an additional understanding of the word racism by including a statement that addresses systemic racism. And that statement is, it defines racism as a political or social system founded on racism. So that's pretty impressive. Sometimes we think that one person doesn't have the ability to affect change, and she just proved that's incorrect. We all have the ability to impact change. So my question to you is, how would you respond to this or this ability to change in your respective fields? We'll start with you, Charles.
I've always believed that change takes place first in a micro setting before we can change it in a macro setting. And that means taking stock of ourselves when it comes to racism and systemic racism. Like I said before, if we partake in the system, we are ultimately definitely propagating racism, even though as human beings we might believe that we have transcended that. And so to me, that change starts with little conversations, because that change, when we go out and protest, that change is not going to happen without the support of the majority. And so I would challenge every single person to take stock of themselves. It is hard to have these conversations about racism, because the word racism instantly brings about defense. People become defensive because they just feel, you cannot call me a racist. You know, I have hired 10 black people in my company, or whatever it is. So people become very defensive because they don't inherently see themselves as racist, even though they're participating in a system that is continuously disadvantaging people. So to be able to take that first step at looking inward and identifying our own prejudices, our own biases, and how we impact the people around us, then collaboratively we can work together to change the system. Because you ain't going to change the system or you aren't going to fight for change if you don't believe that what you do is hurting other people. And so that's where that starts. For me, it's I like intimate settings, so I like to have intimate conversations because it's a web, and then those conversations happen in other facets, and before we know, collectively we can all agree after doing our own soul searching that truly, even though we have done some work for ourselves, that the system still continues to propagate that. And at that point that we change the system. Is that point that we put policies in place, or fight to put policies in place, or vote people in place, or vote people in systems that would enact that change, or that would be allies in that process, instead of continuing to reinforce the changes or reinforce the old system that is only working for a certain group of people.
Okay. So in your work in working with police departments,
Yes.
Teaching
Implicit bias.
implicit bias.
Yes.
So that's kind of how you applied in terms of your field, beginning those intimate conversations during those sessions
Yes.
to begin dismantling the system. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Alrighty. Thank you. Chief Tusken.
Yeah, so Charles, he hit a lot of very, very salient points. I think as leaders, it's incumbent upon you to look inward first, understand and know yourself, and then also to hear in a position of a police chief. We have a monopoly. You don't get to shop to the next police department because you don't like ours. So you look at how can we address all the dynamic needs of a community and all the people in that community. And for me, the change has to come from within. Certainly, that happens from meeting, from listening. But it also has to be, how do we change the people within our organization and that awareness? And, so for me, it is, I've been chief for just over 4 years. One of the first initiatives I brought in Dr. Lori Friedel, who is a national trainer on implicit bias, brought together community leaders that represented our community, and we had our command staff also there. And to hear, it was probably one of the most powerful days I've spent in my office in my career, was to hear those I stories that I hadn't considered, to see the pain, to see the tears, to have people tell stories about their frustrations and how hard they've had to work. So it changed hearts of people who are in our organization and who are the leaders in our organization. And then through the Roots training at College of St. Scholastica, and had our command staff go through that. And so what I'm focusing on leaders, but the leaders are the ones that help get our middle managers and our officers. And we've had really been blessed that Charles has come and been part of our implicit bias training that he's done now to the entire department, not just the leadership team. But it is, you really first, one of the takeaways I think I can add is that the training that we did with Dr. Lori Friedel, we have evaluations after them. And I've never seen a training that we've ever done where every single training critique came in talking about this as being one of the best trainings I've ever attended. And I wouldn't have guessed with officers it would have been implicit bias, but what people often in the comments wrote was, I understand that I have biases and that's okay. It's how nobody had ever given him permission to understand that I have biases and now what am I going to do about it? And it was that soul searching that is the impetus that you have to get to first before you affect change in your own life and start to change the lives of others. So much like Charles said, it comes at a micro level before it gets into a macro level. And that synergy you build.
I agree. So let's go back to the statement I made earlier about adaptability and evolution of species and talk about this notion, how this may have impacted your lives. So Chief Tusken, I understand that you have familial ties to the infamous Duluth lynchings. Would you be willing to share your life and subsequent changes that this event had upon you and how you perform as Chief Police Officer of Duluth?
Yes, I do. And my great aunt was the young woman who alleged to have been sexually assaulted back in 1920. When there was no evidence that it ever happened. And what happened in our family is a tremendous shame this was for Duluth, for our family. And so my mother, who married into the family, when she first was getting married, the matron, my grandmother, told her the story about what had happened and that you were never to speak of this again. And so it shows the level of shame that this brought upon our family. And so she never did. She ultimately, the reason I find out about it is because the pen name, if you will, that was in the original book was going to be rewritten to reveal her true name, and then she knew that us children would find out. And so ultimately, I can remember working downtown near where the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial is, and my mother calls me and said, well, Mom, I'm at work. She says, but it's really important, I got to tell you. And she shares this story and told me, and it was absolutely devastating. And I said, how did I get to this age without you ever telling me that?
Can we pause right there?
Yeah.
We have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to give Charles a chance to respond quickly how maybe you evolved coming from Cameroon to the United States. Just briefly, 30 seconds or so. And that's not fair, but
no, I'm sorry.
Coming from Cameroon to the United States was an eye-opener for me. And part of this is because the media had fed my experience of the U.S. was through media.
Yes.
My experience of people of African descent was through media.
Yes.
And one of the most eye-opening thing for me was the fact that the media had fed me a total and complete lie about the people.
So then you would say your evolution then resulted in you making your own decisions understanding.
My own decisions and understanding of what that was,
So we're going to have to wrap up. I'm going to read the statement. A gentleman named Ramana Maharshi made a statement. He said, there are no others. If you hear that statement, what does that say to you quickly, and how does that impact what you do for a living? There are no others.
We're all in this together.
All in this
We
together.
are all people. We all have equal value and importance, and we need to come together.
Okay.
And what that says for me is
10 seconds.
10 seconds. We often hear people say, Black community,
Yes.
their community.
Yes.
And that is always a way to take ourselves out of the problem
Okay.
and distinguish ourselves out of it.
Thank you.
But it's important for us to say it is our town,
Yes.
it is our community, and it is our problem to fix.
Thank you. I want to thank our guests, Duluth Police Chief Mike Tusken and Charles Fye, for joining me for this Almanac North focus on systemic racism. Our plan is to continue this conversation in the coming weeks as we focus on the challenge of racism and an equitable society for all. I would like to thank visual artist Miri Villard, who generously shared the image used at the beginning of tonight's program. It was a community mural project organized by Miri. The murals are adjacent to the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial in downtown Duluth. Follow Almanac North on our social media sites for the latest updates and news about our next Focus On special. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch this and other Almanac North programs at wdse.org or find us on the PBS app. For our crew in the studio, I'm Pamela Gnunjiri. Thanks for watching.